And we are recording on Thursday, December 7th, 2023 at 12:05 p.m. Eastern time on the 80th, no, 82nd anniversary of Pearl Harbor. But Dr. William Happer, you have a crazy resume. I mean, and by crazy, I mean the best possible way. Um, I've actually had heard of the Jason Advisory Group through Annie Jacobson's book about DARPA, and that's what originally attracted my eye. My mom is a big fan of you and has been asking me for a while to get you on. So finally, I was like, all right, I'll try. And luckily enough for me, I got you. And you were in Trump's administration. You hoping to challenge the climate crisis narrative. And anyone that knows the show knows that I've had on Patrick Moore before, co-founder of Greenpeace. We've talked about that, but to what I understand is the people running his I guess campaign were worried about how that would affect his reelection, and so that's as much as I've gathered from that. But so I stopped babbling. Dr. Happer, could you please introduce yourself?
Well, thank you, Tommy. I'm glad to talk to you and to your fans. I've heard good things about your show.
Oh, good.
So I'm happy to dive into any particular issue that you think we ought to discuss in detail.
Let's wing it. Well, I am I am a geek for DARPA, and I just the general idea of it too. I just love the idea of like a small agile organization, and I know Jason isn't part of DARPA. I think technically it's split in the early 2000s. Um, but I was thinking about how to tie in the two, the climate crisis narrative as well as the Jason Advisory Group, whatever you want to call DARPA. And I think there is a thread to connect the two, and it's that these groups are often meant to look far forward at esoteric niche problems, and obviously Sputnik, McNamara with the whole digital line and dropping all the sensors and the ammonia sensors, and obviously the creation of the internet, looking far forward about how I would imagine right now they're probably so far in deep fake technology, virtual reality, yeah, organic or synthetic life. I would imagine in 50 years we'll find that out. One of the big things would be a form of national security would be climate change. And it's not necessarily a foreign adversary, but that doesn't mean it's not still a threat to national security. If there was, whether it's incoming ICBMs or an incoming tide, they would want to know, correct? And so to me, it's very interesting. And I'm of the same mindset as you in that I think this is a manufactured narrative to implement draconian control. Obviously, I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. It's interesting that someone with your background looks at this and says, no, this is blown out of proportion. Someone who is from the, cut your teeth in the area of how do we look at hyper advanced far out problems. For you it was right, optical lensing, and I would imagine shooting down ICBMs or Reagan's Star Wars, probably something along the lines of doing that. But if you can't tell, I'm fanboying. I'm very excited, so I'll try to slow it down. And what led to your challenging of the climate crisis narrative?
Well, Tommy, one of my adventures was I spent 3 years as the director of energy research at U.S. Department of Energy in the early 90s under President Bush Sr. And, I had a big budget. It was $3.5 billion. And so I thought I ought to understand how we were spending our money. It was the taxpayers' money, and be able to defend it if anyone should ask me, why are you spending all this money? So one way I tried to do that was I would have a principal investigator that we were supporting come in once a week and brief me and my assistant directors on what they were doing. And I wanted to try and understand it well enough that I could explain it to a congressman or someone who might ask a question about it. And most of the principal investigators were just delighted to have an invitation to come to Washington that some bureaucrat was interested in the details of what they were doing. And so they couldn't wait to come, and they prepared view graphs, and they were just delighted to answer questions, to me and to my little group. And the surprising thing was that there was one group that was completely different, and that was the environmentalists, the climate scientists. And we were supporting a lot of work there too. And when we would invite them to come in, many of them would refuse to come. They would say, well, we work for Senator Gore, and, we don't have to come talk to you, and I was very surprised, I didn't mind if they thought they were working for Senator Gore, but it was me who signed the checks. So I would tell them, well, okay, if that's the way you feel, everybody else feels different. They're glad to come, but if you don't want our support, I have lots of people who need research support, and I'll use your money for something else next year. So of course, then they would grudgingly come, in a very resentful way. And then they would give a very uninformative seminar on their work, and you would try and ask a question, well, how did you calibrate this instrument, and how sure are you of this number? The same questions we asked everyone else. And they would say, why are you accusing me of being incompetent? I said, no, of course not. These are normal questions. You ask yourself these questions. So I had a epiphany then that there's something different about the climate research community. And of course, this irritated Al Gore. He didn't want anyone messing with his narrative. And as soon as he and Bill Clinton won the election, he had me fired. It took him a while to find me, but he eventually did. And so I was glad to go back to Princeton. I was not really looking for a career as a bureaucrat. I thought of it as a duty I had to do, just like people who were drafted.
Sure.
So I went back home, and we were doing some exciting research in my old laboratory. So I was very pleased to get back into real science. But I never forgot this peculiar branch of science that I had learned about at DOE, the climate people. And then I would watch television at night, and I would see some hapless reporter talking about, the Earth coming to an end in 5 years because Senator Gore says so. And I would say, this is complete nonsense. I I supported that work. I know it doesn't say anything of the sort. And my wife would get a little tired of this, and she said, well, if you're so sure that this is right, why don't you speak up and tell people? And so I began to speak up whenever I got a chance, that what you just heard is not true. It's exaggerations at best. And then I just gradually became more and more engaged in pushing back against climate extremism. And that's what I'm doing now. I will do it as long as the Almighty lets me do it. So,
yeah, climate's an interesting. So I was a biology major in college, graduated in 2013. I got into medical school. That's my proudest achievement, probably. But with science of all sorts, there's always an undeniable backbone. No one, maybe we're not sure why something's happened, but there's always an undeniable backbone, and there's always narratives. People have their pet projects, even independent researchers who think they're being objective. Your ego is still attached to it. It's my ego's attached to this podcast. Of course, I want it to succeed. Climate's an interesting one in that there are a lot of there, and again, I don't know what the answer is. But it's an interesting one in that you can't have a control group. It's not me saying, cell phones cause cancer. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And there's, enough time can go by, and you can look at studies and experiences and anecdotal evidence, and maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. And if it does, okay, bad, but we do deal with cancer as a society. Something like this is much more akin to thermonuclear Armageddon, in that, Reagan's SDI or anti-ballistic missiles, man, they better work, because there's no after action report from a first strike. You go, all right, how can we do this better next time? It's not Vietnam. It's not World War II. It's the end of the world. And with the climate change sort of hysteria, that is something that it's hard to fight against, because the argument is so rooted in emotion. It's the end of the world. We can't be wrong. But I guess I'm just not willing to I'm not willing to throw my hat in with them and say that this isn't a natural cycle of the earth or the sun. Energy independence is certainly important. That's not a bad thing. One argument is so what does it matter if we go green and it turns out climate change isn't real? Okay, we're energy independent from the Middle East. But I don't think that's entirely I don't think that's a prerogative, because we were energy independent a couple of years ago and now we're not. So for you, how does this compare to past and then future potential giant threats like the Cold War, or this is we better dead than red. We cannot let the Soviets win. How does this, I guess, does it challenge or dilute sort of mass societal movements in the past, to where you go, how many people spoke up against whatever, World War I, World War II, some program, we got to go to the moon, and how many of them are shut down, like you've been shut
Well,
down?
look, I think humanity does these crazy things from time to time. I often urge people to read this wonderful book, Extraordinary Mass Delusions and the Madness of Crowds. It was written
Uh,
in 1842 by Charles Mackay. And he documents, one mass delusion after another. This is a mass delusion. We've seen them many times before.
mm-hmm,
The most recent one in the United States was prohibition.
mm-hmm.
We outlawed alcohol and even passed an amendment. Every state in the union, I think, voted for it. Maybe there was one or two exceptions. But at the time, this was the end of World War I, there were a few people who tried to say this may not work. It might encourage organized crime. It might be hard to enforce. It might get people to have contempt for the government. And everything they said was true, and it was much worse than they had
Al
predicted.
Capone, yeah.
So, what did it give us? It gave us 20, 15 years of crime. We had Al Capone,
Mm-hmm.
had rum runners, so we finally repealed the amendment. It's the only amendment we've ever repealed. But this is a movement sort of like this. People thought they were doing good. You couldn't oppose it because you were in league with Demon Rum, and then here, you're trying to kill the planet. There's a difference, though. With climate, we're talking about something that we actually know a lot about. The Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That's a very, very old place. And we've got a sedimentary record from geology, a geological record that tells us that climate is always changing. Climate has never been stable. It's not stable from hour to hour, day to day, month to month, year to year. It's just characteristic that it changes, and that's not at all surprising because we're talking about two fluid systems, the atmosphere and the oceans. Fluids are notoriously unstable. That's been known from the beginning of quantitative physics. But you can look at this entire period, 4 billion years, and there has never been a CO2 induced tipping point or anything that's discussed. These boogeymen that are brought up, there's no record of it. It just doesn't happen, and there's no reason it should. I know probably more about greenhouse gases than most. It's sort of my field of study, with lasers in the atmosphere. And it's very hard for greenhouse gases to make much change. They're small effects. And in order to get something that is scary, you have to take the direct effect that you calculate, say from doubling CO2, which is a 1% decrease of radiation to space, which corresponds to a 0.25% change in temperature. It's a very small change, it's less than 1 degree. And you have to puff that up with positive feedbacks, you know. So when you talk to the alarmists, they say, well, it's going to be at least 3.5 or 4 degrees of warming from CO2, when the actual first calculation is less than 1 degree. So where does the 3.5 and 4 degree of amplification come from? It comes from positive feedbacks. All sorts of whimsical feedbacks have been invented. Most of them involve water vapor or clouds. But, you know, there's a problem there too, in that this is a natural system we're talking about. Most natural systems have negative feedbacks.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's even got a special name. It's called the Chatelier's principle, that, you know, if you perturb a system, it will change in such a way that it'll try to reduce the perturbation. It doesn't try to increase it.
Maintain
There are 2 cases where
homeostasis.
that happens. High explosives have positive feedbacks, but it's very unusual in nature. And we're talking about nature. There's no evidence that the climate is a high explosive system. If it were, we would have been gone long ago. You know, we'd have self-destructed if it were positive feedback. So there are all sorts of reasons to recognize that there is no threat from climate change. If anything, you know, increasing CO2 is very good for the world. If you look at the geological record, we're really in a CO2 famine now compared to the usual amounts that are around. And so if you look down from satellites today, you see the Earth is greening. Everywhere in the Earth, it's getting greener. There's more chlorophyll. And that's because of more CO2. It's not because you can take out effects of rainfall and other things that might change chlorophyll. It's clearly due to CO2, and it's especially pronounced, you know, in arid regions. So what we're seeing over the past 50 years is a gradual shrinkage of deserts. Deserts are not growing, they're shrinking, and that's because of more CO2. And crop yields are going up. And it's very clear that a major factor in increased crop yields is more CO2. There are other important factors too. Fertilizer is very important, especially nitrate fertilizer. You know, cropping practices are very important. Crop varieties, you know, Norman Borlaug and his development of wheats and other crops for the tropics was just tremendously important. But a non-trivial and important part has been increasing CO2. So if we got rid of all CO2 and went back to pre-industrial levels, you would lose typically 30, 40% of crop productivity. You know, why is that a good thing? It's not a good thing. It's a crime against humanity. So the whole thing is crazy. It's like prohibition. You know, maybe there was something to be said for prohibition, but there's really nothing to be said for this, you know, for climate extremism, because there is no threat, none at all.
It really does come down to another great book is I think it's The Crowd by Gustave Le Bon, which was also the turn of the century. And yeah, he talks about he to a T. I remember when I first read it, I thought it had to have been written in the 40s or 50s because he was describing Hitler, but it was written 50 years prior, and he's talking about the madness of crowds. But yeah, I guess it always comes down to, you know, it's you want to love the devil, you know, right? You look at something like, you know, you look at some Gordon Gekko type guy on Wall Street, and you almost appreciate it. You know what he's after. He's after, you know, more predatory loans. He wants a faster car, a higher penthouse, you know, a younger secretary. And it's bad, but you know it's bad, right? Versus the true believer. I forget the quote, but you know, the worst tyrant is the one that thinks it's actually in your interest because he will do anything. And in his mind, it's a sacrifice. With this, I understand on a human level. I don't agree with it, but I can think abstractly. I get the idea, right? You don't want the world to fall apart. You have kids or kids, or maybe you don't have kids, but you've got to enjoy this wonderful life. You get to see blue skies and clouds, and you don't want it to all, go to crap for the next generation. I get that in theory, but it's being pushed so hard. I can't help but think that the reason it's being continued to push is because if you truly believed it with your heart and soul, and then you found evidence that it wasn't real, you would be relieved. Be like, oh, the great thing that's causing all of this anxiety is over. But the reason it's still being pushed, I can't help but feel that you have to follow the money. Who's making money off this? Is this deindustrialization? Is this a form of nation state warfare? Is this a form of government control? Is this, carbon tax? It's things that would make COVID look liberating in comparison. What do you think and this is all obviously speculation, and you can never know what someone's thinking, so we're just diving into that. But why do you think it's still being pushed so hard? If the people
Well,
know,
look, Tommy, I mean, it's not a single reason. Different
sure,
people are moved by different reasons. There are sincere people who've just been misinformed. They're not evil people, but they've had this fire hose of propaganda since they were little children,
mm,
So what are they supposed to think? Would, society lie to me? And the answer is absolutely they
yeah,
would.
yeah, day in, day out.
Yeah, yeah. So that, I feel sorry for those people. I sort of understand where they're coming from. Many of them, for example, I think we all need a cause bigger than ourselves.
Hmm.
Why are we here? We've got this short life that has been given to us, and we should do something important with it. And people used to get some of that satisfaction by organized religion of one
Hmm.
type or another, but most people now are less satisfied, with religions, organized religion. So they're looking for something, and one of the things they found is saving the planet. What
Mm,
could be a more noble cause? I'm devoting my life to saving the
sure.
planet. So their motives are fine. The problem is the planet doesn't need saving, and as the old proverb goes, the road to hell is paved
Did
with
with
good
good
intentions.
intentions.
So that's one group. It's a large group. A second group, Upton Sinclair had this wonderful quote. It's very hard to get a man to understand something if his salary depends on his not
Right.
understanding it.
I just discovered Upton Sinclair in the last year. I
Yeah,
read The
yeah,
Jungle and
yeah. Well,
Oil.
he had pluses and minuses, but
Sure.
he was a good judge of the human character,
Oh
and
yeah.
he was right on this one. And so many people are making a lot of money from this. The people who are selling sustainable solutions by campus. We're
Hmm.
spending absurd amounts of money at Princeton, for green infrastructure, which is cost ineffective. It's just wasting money. We can do it because we're tax exempt. People give us money and the mistaken belief that we're wise and we'll use it wisely. And so it looks nice, but it's simply a waste of money. It's a little bit
Sure.
like Marie Antoinette. They said, well, Queen Marie, the people have no bread. Well, let them eat cake.
Let them eat
Let them
cake.
eat
Yeah.
sustainable
Yeah.
energy. Sustainable energy will not sustain the modern world. It just if you do the engineering details, it's not going to work.
Not energy dense enough.
Yeah. So and there's no need to go to it right now. There's still lots of conventional energy left in fossil fuels. There's nuclear power. We know we
Yes.
can make nuclear power work, but you can't get any of that into society today because of the opposition from these planet saviors, right?
Mm.
And that they're really not saving the planet. They're making it worse. In my area here in Princeton, I'm surrounded by these black solar panels over what was once green meadows, and today they're not making any electricity. It's a cloudy day, it's snowing a little bit. So, but black panels are still there covering once beautiful fields. And,
Mm.
or you see these windmills wherever the eye looks, chomping away on birds and bats and
Mhm.
on your hearing. And you know, we used to use wind in society up until the discovery of the steam engine. You know, that was really what powered society. It was wind and a little bit of water. And we immediately stopped using wind for good reasons, because it doesn't blow
Not
all the
energy
time.
dense enough. Yeah.
And yeah, the old sailors, you know, the 19th century, they used to talk about a fair wind and the forecastle hold, which they meant the steam engine that finally, you know, freed them from the vagaries of climate, of the weather, I guess I should say.
The Newcomen engine.
Yeah. So I don't know. So there's we were talking about motives, and then there are political motives. You know, there's this wonderful comment by H.L. Mencken. You know, the whole aim of practical politics is to keep people alarmed and therefore clamorous to be led to safety by a string of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. You know, so, you know, people who lust for power from the beginning of time have always used the threat of this or that, you know, to whip the population into line. You know, if you don't obey me, you know, you're going to die. You know, so that is a big component of it too. You know, politicians love power. You know, and you look at all the deadly sins of mankind. I think the lust for power is the worst of all.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I don't know. There are other reasons we don't need to go into them now, but it's a complex issue, and it's sort of a perfect storm of motives, some of which are contradictory, but they're pushing us into this. I think Schellenberg just yesterday or the day before called it a death cult, and that's really true. That's what's
It
being.
really is.
Yeah.
It is. I've had on Dr. Patrick Moore a couple times. He's the co-founder of Greenpeace, as well as the head of Jihad Watch, Robert Spencer, Richard Spencer. Richard. Robert. I always mess it up. And he's been on with Dr. Moore on here, and they've talked about that, and like it's really no less than a death cult. And I think everything you hit on was true. It's something to give your life towards. You know, I'm saving the world, right? And then it's also in terms of the energy density. That's what I always come back to. A great book is Energy by Richard Rhodes, and I've had the pleasure of having him on here several times before, but talking about the always increasing in the density of energy, right? And for me, my fallback comes, this is what I always go to, is towards the end of World War II. Everyone knows about the Manhattan Project, everyone knows about the A-bomb, but a lot of people don't know about the incendiary bats. The incendiary bats was this idea that we were going to strap little like jelly packs of napalm to bats, and they would have timed explosives for, let's say, 12 hours, and you drop hundreds of thousands of them over Tokyo, which was primarily wooden structures. You do it during the day, and the bats would all go find places to nest, up in attics, up in, wooden beams. And then at night, 12 hours later, they'd all burst at the same time. And it would make the bombing of Dresden look like a picnic. It didn't work. They tried it, and they accidentally burned down an Air Force warehouse. And around the same time, the A-bomb worked. So we scuttled that one and went, let's do the A-bomb. That one's kind of embarrassing. That is what you do in total war, is you throw everything, whether it's the A-bomb or whether it's bats with napalm on them, right? No matter how goofy it is. It's, we laugh at it, and it's like, hey, man, we're fighting Hitler and the Japanese, a two-front war. We do anything. If we were in total war, you would use nuclear power. You would use nuclear power. You would find ways, right, to have it so it shuts down instead of overrunning. You'd learn from 3 Mile Island, Fukushima, Chernobyl, and you would say, hey, even if it, we might have another accident, but overall, it's worth it because we're going to save mankind, right? Energy density, less output, less CO2, even though we're talking about how CO2 is not bad. But they're not doing that. They're vehemently against it. And to me, I that is what hits me as I go, someone at the very top. I think a lot of people have good intentions, like you said. I think someone at the very top knows it's either at quote unquote best, it's somebody that wants a ton of money because they're gonna, start selling all this biodegradable whatever. At worst, it's a death cult. They want less crops, they want less energy density, they want lower standards of living for all of us. Why is that? I don't know. I also don't know why serial killers do what they do. It's a death cult. It's what it is. I mean, just bring it down to what organic life takes, right? Lipids, carbohydrates, fats. We need energy coming in. We need ATP. We need water, oxygen. You're cutting down at a very base level one of the inputs to the balanced equation to create more life. Some people go way off and go, "Oh, it's satanic." I don't know. I don't think you even need to go that far though. Maybe it is, but it's a death cult. It is on the surface. You are reducing food availability, crop yields, and population across the spectrum. So at best, it's some money hungry people. At second best, it's just, they want more power, more taxes, monitor everything, shut down speech they don't like, which is still pretty bad. And at very worst, it is, for whatever reason, it's a death cult. And it comes back to all these things would be allayed from my worries if we announced some new, $1 trillion initiative over 10 years to build 3 nuclear power plants in every state. If that was the case, I'd shut my mouth. I'd go, oh, maybe this really is. Maybe they're using the NRO and the National Geospatial Agency and they're modeling everything and they're going, no, this really is real. I'd shut my mouth. I live like a mile from the ocean here in Portland, Maine. But that's not the case. And that's what gets me. What, again, kind of on speculation, or we don't have to do speculation, but your thoughts on those? Is it somewhere along the lines of that?
Well, you bring up nuclear power, and fission nuclear power really does work very well. We've had a few accidents there. The worst was Chernobyl, which had many fatalities, but there were no fatalities at 3 Mile Island, and the fatalities at Fukushima were due to the tidal wave. It wasn't
the tsunami. The giant wave.
And there was I don't know what to say to this. There's a famous do you know about Hanlon's razor? Hanlon's razor is this maxim that never ascribe
the malice, what is incompetence.
Never ascribe, some stupid policy to malice when it's probably just simply stupidity, right?
Yeah.
So that's Hanlon's razor. And I think a lot of that is going on, that, people in power, I've seen a lot of them because I've spent a fair amount of time in Washington. They're very detached from reality, they spend all of their time worrying about, what's the next election, how can I get a few more votes? And so the whole idea of what's technically true or what's morally true is irrelevant to many of them. I mean, they're not bad people, but, that line of business does that to you, even if you start out with the highest moral principles, eventually you become, captivated by this because you get to like, the job that you have. It gives you power. You go to a lot of black tie dinners, people are very nice to you because you control a lot of money. So I don't know, nuclear, there's something that for example, DARPA might be able to help with, or DARPA-like organizations. There's a Energy DARPA, which is modeled after the original DARPA, trying to do things with energy. And, one of the smartest DARPA program managers I ever knew once told me, well, Will, the secret of DARPA is that you have to kiss a lot of frogs to find Prince Charming. And so,
Yeah.
you have to be willing to fail on many of the things that you support.
Yeah.
And that's just the way life is, and the idea that you can predict success on every one of these projects, it's crazy. That's history shows us that's not the way the world works.
Mm.
But if you don't have these successes, then you're open to criticism. Some grandstanding congressman will attack you in your budget because he wants to use the money for some other boondoggle.
Mm.
So just running a democratic society like we have has always been difficult, because there are so many conflicting motives, and our founding fathers knew that very well. They just assumed that human beings are corrupt and or corruptible at the very least. And how can you put together a government that will nevertheless function with corrupt people? And so that was the whole philosophy behind, the separation of powers, term limits. When I first went to Washington, I was advised to read the Federalist Papers again. I had to read them in college, but I read them again, and they made a lot more sense to me
Oh yeah.
this time than before. I recommend anyone to read them again just to see what was in the minds of people like Hamilton and Jay and the folks who really put our government together. I'm drawing a blank on the most important one of all, the one who wrote.
Is it Payne?
No,
No, he wasn't. He wrote. No, he didn't write.
the guy from Virginia. He was a Princeton grad, and he wrote most of the Constitution. Madison.
Oh, okay, James Madison.
James Madison. Yeah, he's a little short guy. He's not very tall, but he did his best to understand the reality of human nature in writing the Constitution. And his fellows at that time were also very thoughtful, and I think they did a good job. And I hope we adhere to that. We'll continue to make mistakes. Like kissing the frogs. But I do believe that we, compared to all the other systems out there, that the United States has one of the best. And so let's hope we don't screw it up.
Wasn't Woodrow Wilson? Didn't he work at Princeton?
Who was that?
Woodrow Wilson?
Well, Woodrow Wilson was president of Princeton. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
He had a big impact on the university. He's considered a non-person now. We've taken his names off buildings and things like that, but because he allegedly was racist. I don't think he was racist, but yeah, you know how academia is today. It's there's very little courage in pushing back against this silliness.
If I just finished about 2 months ago a book on Woodrow Wilson, and I mean, one, you cannot separate, or you can't separate the person from the time. I mean, his dad was a preacher. He grew up in post-Civil War America, and he was not racist at all. But furthermore, when you read what he talked about kind of behind the scenes concerning World War I, was human nature. Is during the Treaty of Versailles, or writing all of it, he would just keep saying, like, we cannot be doing this tit for tat thing. He was saying if we tax and tariff and punish Germany to no end, it's just going to happen again, and it's just going to keep. This is all of human history. At a certain point, like, you have to understand human nature, and that it can't all be payback, and it can't all be this, and it can't all be empire building. And he was right, and that's exactly what happened. So, kind of along those lines of the individual needing to be reelected, right? That's back to Upton Sinclair, right? It's your salary is dependent on it. So, I mean, when Eisenhower first, I think it was when Eisenhower first ran, his managers were saying like you can't come out for equal rights for everyone. That's not going to play in the southern states. And like you said, it's not married to objective moral reality. Eisenhower luckily just went along with what he was going to do anyway, right? And then in hindsight, we look at it and we applaud it, right? But at the time, it was not popular at all for what he did. I mean, he had to send in the 101st Airborne, right? That's insane to think about. And more and more so, you think about every 2-year elections, for House of Representative, 4 years president, 6 years senator. Yeah, you're kind of on this moving train, and you're on a train on a unicycle juggling, and you're trying to get back into office, either because you like the job, you like the position, you like the title, you like all the meetings and everything, and you want to be president, or you legitimately think you're just doing the best thing, and you're like, I just got to get in. I'll pass this stupid climate bill, but I'm really going to push education. I'm really going to push for more funding for cancer research or whatever. And it's just this moving thing, and no one wants to be the person to come out and say it's so well packaged, right? It's green, and it's, if you're against it, it's like, oh, you're against saving puppies. It's like, no, I'm not against mountains and clean rivers, but like that's not theirs to advertise. And I guess to me that's always what it comes back to. And to nuclear power, I mean, the reason we know it really works, the reason it's really effective, is because we put it on aircraft carriers and submarines. The military doesn't play games. They're the ones that use it because it's reliable and it never goes out. And so to me, there's not that hard rock of foundation, right? Maybe you don't know why cigarettes are dangerous, but enough anecdotal evidence, even if it's 50 years ago, you can look at someone and be like, yeah, I know that grandpa used to smoke a lot and he died relatively young. Maybe you don't understand carcinogens. Maybe you don't understand onca genes inside the nucleus and the nucleolus of the cell, but there's a general idea. To me, there's no meat on the bones. It seems too much, like you were saying about the atmosphere in the ocean. It's too fluid. It's too changing. It's not definitively, on this day will be the end of life on Earth and the oceans will rise. I'm 33, and it's already like an eye rolling idea in my life. Like, I've heard it before. So I have to thus conclude I would say it's I maybe I'm a little cynical, but I don't think it's a Hanlon's razor. I don't know. I know that, but I don't agree with that it's incompetence. I think to a degree it's incompetence. I think the guy running for local senate, sure, that's probably, yeah, whatever. It's save the polar bears. I'm getting in office, right? I would imagine at the very tippy top, it's malice. It's malice for money, or it's, what do you do once you get to the highest echelon of power and money in the world? It's you want control. No amount of dollar bills is going to do it for you. You want control. You want ego. You want statues named after you, but you want domination. You want empire. And that's what I think it is. And it's, what better, as opposed to an external enemy, like all throughout history, to corral everyone, like you were saying, kind of whip them together. Hey, man, we got to fight them. And, how else are we going to do it? They're going to take down the Roman Empire. What better enemy than an enemy that's not a person, that can shift, and it's changing, and it affects all of us. It's against against the Chinese, it's against Mexico, it's against Canada. It's climate change.
Well, that is one of the motives that I didn't discuss, but I think that has been one of the motives. There were these early efforts by people like the Club of Rome
Mm-hmm.
to try and make a better human society, stop wars, for example. And one of their ideas was to find a common enemy that we could all rally against.
Mm-hmm.
And so we wouldn't fight each other. And so CO2 was an ideal enemy. It
Yep.
happens not to be true, but it's universal. So the whole world has to come together. But what we're seeing is that it's not working. There are wars all over the place. There's a war going on in Ukraine. There's a war going on in Palestine. So it hasn't stopped those. It has not united the world. China's building coal plants as fast
Yeah.
as it can, and so is India, for good reason. Godspeed to them. They're doing the right thing for their countries. And so it's had no good effects at all. It's been purely negative, all pain, no gain. And, so, but as I said, humans do this from time to time. And the Crusades, in the Middle Ages, medieval times, they were supposedly, to save the true cross or something. I was never quite sure what they were for, but in reality, it was, the lust for power, for money, and things that had absolutely nothing to do with the cover story for the Crusades.
Mm,
And I think that was true on both sides too,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's in terms of a better society. It makes me think of there's a book by Christopher Whitcomb. He was a sniper in the FBI. Unimportant. It's a whole book about special ops, whatever. But there's a quote from it. Doesn't even matter about the book. There's a quote from it, and I read it 15 years ago, and I still remember it. The pyramids were built by the whip and rye soup. Rome died in the baths. Is this there's nothing new under the sun? Have we
Mhm.
reached a level of some empires last longer, but we're coming up on 250 years, which is, arguably the length of an empire. Are we dying in the baths? Have we done everything? And now it's just some luxury. It's very ego. It's we're saving the planet. We're saving all of it. We're saving the planet. We're not doing something like an Eisenhower highway system or going to the moon or creating the internet. We're saving the planet. It's everyone. Is this just a luxury thing? Will they study this in 1,000 years and say this is America died in the baths? It's they shut down their own industrial might, and the same things that made us so powerful in World War II and the War Powers Act was our ability to. It's like they were laying down a Liberty ship every day. They were completing a P-51 Mustang, I think, every 61 minutes. Those
Well,
two.
I don't think that will happen, Tommy.
Okay.
I agree with you that it's a great danger. And if we did everything that the alarmists demand, that would happen.
Okay.
But I don't think Americans as a nation, are stupid enough to do that.
I agree.
I know a lot, I have fellow Americans as you do, and a lot of them have good common sense, and at
Mm,
some point they're going to realize that this can't go on. You sort of saw that happen in the Netherlands in the recent election where they brought in this right-wing party. That wasn't an accident. It was the government had pushed too long and too hard, just crazy things that the average Dutch citizen couldn't stand anymore. And they're certainly not racist, they're not crazies, but they weren't going to take it any longer. And that's going to happen in many countries, including ours,
mm,
sooner or later. And so these excesses they'll be stopped. The only question is how much damage is done before that time comes.
mm,
So it's better that they be stopped as soon as possible before too much damage is done.
mm.
We stopped prohibition in 10 years. It sort of festered on for another 30 years in my boyhood home in Appalachia, which was still dry, in the 50s and 60s. It caused a lot of damage,
Yeah.
no, no good. It was all harm. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it's gonna go underground, right? I mean, like prohibition, giving the power to Al Capone.
Yeah.
It's gonna go underground. You're gonna have oh, dude, where's your windmill and but you're gonna have, Bill down the street. He can get you a tank of gasoline.
Well, you can already see that happening because wealthy people all have diesel generators,
Yeah.
and so they don't care whether the utility goes
No.
on. They've got a big tank full of diesel. It costs some money to do that, but what do they care? They're
Yeah.
not on a barber's salary, or
No.
a truck driver's salary. They can afford it.
Mm.
And but that's very unstable. Again, it's Marie Antoinette's "let them
Let
eat
them
cake," you know, and
let them use
so
solar.
it won't prevail.
Hmm. And I hope it's, and Reagan, right? The external enemy. I often think, what would happen if an alien race came down? We would all put our. It's almost like they decided, why are we waiting for an alien race? Why don't we just use climate change? And again, it's good intentions, to a degree, but it's not natural. It's it has to come from a natural place. And yeah, I can only and I hate to say it, but the only thing I can really think of that would stop it in its tracks would be a world war. It would be where you need mass production. They would they'd throw it right out the window. They'd start producing Abrams tanks. They'd start rolling them off, and no one's gonna. Oh, we can't make any more artillery shells today. The sun's not out. No, you'd find a way. Life or death, you'd find a way. And that's a sad thing, but it might be the only thing that really gets everyone to snap out of it. I don't know. Maybe I'm cynical. I hope I'm not. I try to be optimistic.
Well, I hope you're too pessimistic. I hope we'll get out of it without a
Okay. All
war.
right.
Yeah, I think we will.
Okay.
Yeah,
I need to take a lesson from you. I'm normally the overly optimistic person. I'll have people
yeah.
on here and they'll be like, "You're way too doe-eyed." And I find myself, I'm being the Grinch right now. I'm like, "It's all over." And you're like, "No, it's not. It can still be beautiful." Um, I told you I'd let you go in an hour, so we'll wrap it up in a minute.
That's great.
Um, just personally, something, I've got to interview Charlie Duke, who walked on the moon. Got to interview some really kind of crazy figures in the world. Um, what advice would you have for me, just a 33-year-old doing my own thing, making this podcast? And the most advice I generally get has nothing to do with the podcast or business. They're all like, love your parents, love your siblings, get married, have a family. That seems to be the pretty much universal advice. But just asking you, what advice would you have for me?
Well, I think my advice is I agree with the things you mentioned, but in addition, I think everyone should try and find something in life that they're good at, and
Mm,
they should do that, you know. And so, for example, if you're good at physics, you should do physics. If you're good at, cutting hair, you should be a barber. You know, if there are, if you're a mind that you like to help people, you should be a nurse. And but whatever you do, it should be a job that you like and that you're proud to do it and
mm,
you like doing it. And it doesn't have to be all that sophisticated. The great reformer Martin Luther says, a shoemaker praises God by making good shoes. And
mm,
so something like that, I think, would help a lot, if every human being, or as many as possible, could feel that they have a reason for living, and that the world is a better place for them and for what they do. It can be very modest, but nevertheless, it can be good for the world.
mm.
Um, but that's only one thing. There are many other bits of advice I'm sure you can get, and you pick and choose. You do them all
Mm.
to the extent that you can make them fit together.
I like that. Yeah, and maybe that's kind of a lesson for every. It doesn't need to be you're saving the world from climate change. It
Well,
can
for
be.
example, get a good if you do good podcasts that get people to think for themselves, that's a little bit like making, excellent shoes.
Mm,
It's something that is good for the world, and so you should do that.
mm,
Learn how to do it better. You're doing
yeah.
pretty well already, I would say.
Thank you, sir. Okay. All right. I like that. I like that advice. And I think that kind of goes for everyone, right? It's like some people say, like, I don't want to be a stay-at-home mom. But I mean, I think about, my mom was a nurse and she had my oldest brother and then the next three. And
Mm.
then she was a stay-at-home mom and my, kind of traditional roles. Dad went out, breadwinner. And then when the last one of us went to college, as if nothing happened, she got up and got recertified to be a nurse and went back and became a nurse. But I don't think, sure, someone else might go, oh, you were a stay-at-home mom. But to me, it's like, that's my mom. That's my rock. Like, to me, that's not nothing. And there's nothing my mom could do, more in this world than be that. There's nothing my dad could have done more than be a breadwinner and be, like a stern father. This is the line. And you don't have to go be Superman and save the planet. Like, you can make great shoes. I think almost all 1,388 episodes of worn these slippers. Someone made some great slippers. And you know what? This thermos is a fantastic thermos. I've had this chair since episode 50.
Yeah,
Hey man, it's not nothing to me. It's not nothing to me. This is great stuff. And so
yeah.
I think that's a brilliant point, and I do appreciate that. I would love to, and I'll let you go, but I would love to have you back on sometime to talk about what you did with optics, if you can, whatever's, I guess declassified. But I would love to nerd out on that. I would absolutely love to read up on it and try to keep up with your mind.
Well, that's probably enough for now, but maybe we'll talk in the future.
Okay, yeah, that's what I meant. Not right
Um,
now. That's what.
Good.
Yeah, no. We're gonna wrap it up. But
All right.
thank you so much for your time, Dr. Happer, and thank you for your advice, and
Yeah.
thank you for your optimism. I needed that too.
Yeah. Okay, Tommy.
Thank
Keep
you
up
so
the good
much,
work.
sir. Guys,
Okay.
God bless.
Bye-bye.
Take